It began as an ordinary morning in a small American town. The sun had just broken through the clouds, painting light across Main Street, where the rhythm of everyday life, shopkeepers opening their doors, parents rushing children to school, workers grabbing coffee, was in full swing. And then came James. He was a man who had known hardship. Once employed in construction, he lost his job after an injury. One setback led to another until the roof over his head slipped away. Now, James carried his life in a worn backpack, his dignity in his quiet posture, and his hope in the courage it took simply to step forward. That morning, James walked into the local bank. He wasn't there to beg. He wasn't there to disturb. He was there to open a small account with the little money he had saved from odd jobs. An act of hope, a declaration that tomorrow could be better than today. But before he could cross the threshold, a guard blocked his way. "This isn't a place for you," the man said. The lobby, filled with polished shoes and pressed suits, turned silent. James was turned away, and for a moment it seemed the door to his future had closed as well. 30 minutes later, police cars pulled up. People braced themselves for conflict. But what happened next was not chaos. It was a turning point. The officers didn't come to drag James away. They had received calls from townspeople who witnessed what had happened. Ordinary citizens who saw injustice in plain sight. And instead of ignoring it, they acted. The officers spoke with James, listened to his story, and then walked him back into the bank, not as a threat, but as a customer, a human being worthy of dignity. By then, the branch manager, realizing the gravity of what had unfolded, greeted James personally and ensured his account was opened. That small account, that small act, became a symbol of something far larger: the power of a community refusing to let one man's worth be denied. My friends, this story is not about banks or badges. It is about us. It is about the courage of citizens who refuse to look away. It is about neighbors who see humanity where others see only difference. It is about the unyielding belief that no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, you deserve the chance to build a better tomorrow. Across this nation, in small acts of kindness and bold stands against injustice, ordinary people are reminding us of who we are. We are a people who persevere. We are a people who rise after we fall. We are a people who know that dignity is not reserved for the wealthy or the powerful. It belongs to every human being. So tonight, let us remember James. Let us remember that a single moment of courage can open doors once thought closed. Let us carry forward the responsibility to see the unseen, to lift up the fallen, to believe in one another even when the world tells us not to. Because change is not born in grand speeches or marble halls alone. Change is born when a community says together, "We will not turn our backs. We will not look away. We will move forward united, determined, and filled with hope." And so, I ask you, when you see someone standing at the door of possibility, don't be the one to block their way. Be the one who opens it. For in lifting others we rise, and in rising together there is no limit to the future we can build. There is a truth so simple, so fundamental, that it should never be questioned. Dignity belongs to everyone. It does not depend on what you own, what you wear, or the titles before your name. It does not fade when hardship comes, nor does it vanish when the world looks away. Dignity is inherent. It is stitched into the fabric of our humanity, present from the very first breath to the very last. And yet, too often, we forget this truth. We walk past the man sitting quietly outside a storefront. We turn our heads when someone stumbles under the weight of their circumstances. We build systems that measure human worth by income, by appearance, by status, and in doing so, we strip people of what no one has the right to take. When that happens, it is not just the individual who suffers, it is all of us. For the strength of a community, the soul of a nation, is only as strong as our willingness to uphold the dignity of every single person who calls it home. Dignity belongs to the mother who works 2 jobs, not for recognition, but to place food on the table for her children. It belongs to the veteran who returned from service carrying invisible scars, still choosing to rise each morning and face the day. It belongs to the young man searching for work, turned away again and again, yet refusing to surrender hope. It belongs to the elderly woman who feels forgotten in a world moving too quickly to notice her. These lives are not side stories to the human journey, they are the very heartbeat of it. We must recognize that denying dignity is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is subtle, a cold glance, a dismissive word, an assumption about someone's worth. Other times it is systemic, barriers that lock people out of opportunity, that protect privilege while punishing poverty. But whether small or large, each denial carries weight. It pushes people further into the shadows, telling them, "You do not matter, you do not belong." And there is nothing more corrosive to the human spirit than to feel unseen, unheard, unwanted. But just as dignity can be denied, it can also be restored. It is restored in the teacher who buys supplies for a student whose family cannot afford them. It is restored in the stranger who pauses to listen, really listen, to someone who has been silenced for too long. It is restored in the employer who sees potential where others see only a rare sume with gaps. It is restored when law enforcement chooses to protect rather than punish, when institutions choose to include rather than exclude, when leaders choose compassion over convenience. Dignity is not a policy, it is a practice. It lives in our daily choices. It asks us to see beyond appearances, not, "What does this person deserve?" but, "What does this person need to flourish?" It demands that we remember that every human being carries a story, often untold, often unseen, and that, in those stories, lie the same dreams, the same fears, the same longings that live in us all. There is power in affirming someone's dignity. A kind word can remind a struggling soul that they matter. A door opened can restore hope where hope seemed lost. A simple acknowledgement, eye contact, a smile, a gesture of respect, can rebuild the very foundation of belonging. When we affirm dignity, we are not just helping someone else stand taller, we are lifting our own humanity as well. When a society commits to protecting dignity for all, something extraordinary happens. Walls begin to crumble. Divisions start to narrow. People once pushed aside begin to participate fully, contributing talents, ideas, strengths that enrich the whole. The invisible become visible. The unheard find their voice. Communities once fractured by suspicion discover common ground. In that shared recognition of humanity, we rediscover what binds us together, not wealth, not status, not circumstance, but the unshakable truth that each life carries equal worth. When we look back through history, when we study the movements that shifted nations and the moments that redefined what was possible, we often speak of leaders whose names are etched into stone and remembered in books. But if we look closer, closer than the monuments, closer than the speeches, we find something else. We find that real change is never the work of one voice alone. It is the work of many. It is the work of ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary courage, persistence, and heart. Change does not begin in palaces or parliaments alone. It begins in kitchens, in classrooms, in factories, in fields, in quiet corners where people decide that what is will no longer be enough, and that what could be deserves to take root. It is sparked by the worker who stands up for safer conditions, not because they are famous, but because they refuse to watch their colleagues suffer. It is carried forward by the mother who insists her child deserves an education, even when the system tells her otherwise. It is the neighbor who organizes a meal drive when disaster strikes, not because cameras are watching, but because hunger cannot wait. Ordinary people drive extraordinary change because they live closest to the need. They see the injustices that statistics cannot capture. They feel the urgency that reports cannot measure. They know that waiting for someone else to fix the world means waiting too long, and so they act. Not with fanfare, but with faith. Think of the young student who begins tutoring children in their neighborhood after school, sparking a ripple effect of learning and opportunity. Think of the retired man who tends a community garden, feeding dozens who would otherwise go without. Think of the nurse who shows up day after day through exhaustion and fear, because she believes that healing is not just a profession, but a calling. These are not headline names, yet their impact reverberates further than any speech could carry. There is a quiet heroism in such actions, and it is precisely that quietness that makes them powerful. They remind us that change does not require wealth, titles, or applause. It requires only the willingness to see a need and to answer it, of gestures. A meal delivered, a hand extended, a voice raised, can grow into movements that transform communities and communities that transform nations. Too often, we are taught to underestimate our influence. We are told that change is for others, for leaders, for people with platforms and resources beyond our reach. But the truth is that every great movement was made possible because countless ordinary citizens refused to surrender to despair. They carried lanterns into the darkness. They lifted one another when the weight was too heavy to bear alone. And because they acted, they proved that the strength of a nation is not measured by its powerful few, but by the resolve of its many. Extraordinary change is not a miracle. It is the product of perseverance. It is built one decision, one action, one sacrifice at a time. It does not arrive fully formed. It grows in the soil of small deeds. It is the teacher who stays after class, the volunteer who spends weekends serving, the neighbor who refuses to give up on a struggling family. These are not extraordinary people. They are ordinary people choosing, over and over again, to act with extraordinary resolve. We must also remember that change is rarely convenient. It demands time when time feels scarce. It demands energy when energy feels spent. It demands courage when fear whispers that silence would be easier. And yet, this is where ordinary people find their strength. They know that comfort has never been the path to progress. They know that waiting for permission has never been the route to justice. And so they persist, fueled not by applause, but by conviction. When ordinary people come together, the impact multiplies. A single act of courage can inspire dozens more. A single refusal to yield can spark a movement. A single stand taken at the right moment can shift the tide of history. It is the combined weight of countless small decisions that bends the arc of the future, shaping it toward justice, toward compassion, toward hope. That is why the story of every community, every nation, is not written only by its presidents, its governors, or its generals. It is written by its teachers, its nurses, its builders, its dreamers, its parents, its workers, by those whose names history may not record, but whose actions carry the weight of transformation. There is a force stronger than wealth, stronger than status, stronger even than the storms of adversity. That force is community. It is the unseen thread that binds us to one another, the quiet promise that says, "You are not alone. We will face this together." From the beginning of time, human beings have survived not as isolated individuals, but as members of a collective. We gathered around fires for warmth, worked side by side to grow food, built shelters not just for ourselves, but for our families and neighbors. Alone, survival was fragile. Together, it was possible. And though centuries have passed, that truth has not changed. We are at our best when we stand together. Community is not defined merely by geography, by streets and boundaries on a map. It is defined by the bonds of trust, empathy, and responsibility that connect us. A true community is one where your struggles are not yours alone, where your victories are celebrated by others, and where your burdens are shared so that none are crushed by their weight. It is the fabric of belonging, woven by countless acts of kindness and courage. Consider the moments of crisis that test us most: natural disasters, economic downturns, times of conflict. In those moments, it is not only institutions that step forward, but ordinary people reaching for one another. Strangers form human chains to rescue neighbors from floods. Volunteers show up at shelters with food and blankets. Families who have little open their doors to those who have nothing. These acts do not erase the hardship, but they transform it. They remind us that even when everything else is uncertain, solidarity can be certain. The strength of community is not measured by the wealth it accumulates, but by the compassion it extends. It is not in the number of walls it builds, but in the doors it opens. It is not in how loudly it celebrates the powerful, but in how gently it uplifts the vulnerable. Communities thrive not when every individual competes for themselves, but when they recognize that their destinies are intertwined. We see this in the parent who takes in a neighbor's child after school so the mother can work a second job. We see it in the young man who mows the lawn of the elderly couple down the street. We see it in the countless volunteers who spend weekends cleaning parks, mentoring youth, and visiting the lonely. These acts may seem small, but they are the mortar that holds the bricks of society together. Without them, the walls of the community weaken. With them, they grow unshakable. And yet, community is not automatic. It requires effort. It requires choice. It is built day by day in the ways we treat one another, in whether we choose suspicion or trust, isolation or connection, indifference or compassion. It asks us to see beyond ourselves and recognize that our individual well-being is bound up with the well-being of those around us. A society that leaves its weakest behind cannot remain strong for long. True community also calls us to accountability. It is not only about what we receive, but about what we contribute. Every voice matters, every hand is needed, every heart has a role to play. Strength is found not in taking more than we give, but in knowing that we are responsible for one another's welfare. The prosperity of one family means little if the family next door goes hungry. The safety of one street means little if the street a block away is left vulnerable. To be strong together, we must commit to each other's flourishing. There is a deep beauty in this truth. When we serve others, we ourselves are strengthened. When we lift someone else's burden, our own burdens feel lighter. When we open our hearts, we discover that compassion multiplies rather than diminishes. In building community, we discover a richer sense of purpose, a deeper sense of belonging, and a shared resilience that no hardship can easily break. History has shown again and again that societies rise when their communities are strong and falter, when they are fractured. Great buildings may crumble, economies may falter, but a community rooted in trust, compassion, and solidarity can weather storms that would otherwise overwhelm. It is not the walls of a city that protect it, but the people within those walls, bound to one another in mutual care. Life is rarely a straight path. For many, it is a winding road filled with unexpected turns, an illness, a lost job, a broken home, a sudden tragedy. Hardship comes to us all in different forms, and it does not ask permission before it arrives. But what hardship can never do, what it has no power to do, is define the worth of a human life. Worth is not determined by the size of a paycheck, the clothes a person wears, or the address they write on a form. Worth does not vanish when mistakes are made, when setbacks come, when struggles weigh heavy on the shoulders. Worth is innate. It is part of the unshakable dignity with which every person is born. To confuse hardship with worth is to misunderstand the very essence of humanity. Too often, however, society tells a different story. We equate success with value and struggle with failure. We assume the man sleeping on a bench is less deserving than the man stepping out of a polished car. We assume the family using food stamps is somehow less capable than the family dining in a fine restaurant. We assume the woman working 2 jobs is less successful than the one climbing a corporate ladder. These assumptions are wrong, and they wound not just the people who bear them, but the communities that allow them to persist. Behind every hardship is a story of resilience, of courage, of love. The man sleeping on that bench may have once been the provider for his family until illness struck. The family stretching every dollar may be teaching their children lessons in perseverance and gratitude that no textbook can offer. The woman working long hours may be sacrificing her own comfort so that her children can have opportunities she never knew. To dismiss their worth is to ignore the quiet heroism of lives lived with endurance and sacrifice. We must remember that hardship is not a reflection of weakness, but often a sign of unseen strength. To endure the cold nights without shelter requires resolve. To face rejection after rejection while searching for work requires courage. To hold a family together when resources are scarce requires determination beyond measure. Hardship, in many ways, reveals the depth of human resilience. It strips away pretense and forces people to discover within themselves reservoirs of perseverance they did not know they had. And yet, the presence of hardship should never be a justification for exclusion or neglect. A society that judges people solely by their circumstances becomes blind to their humanity. A child, wearing hand-me-down clothes is no less deserving of education and opportunity than one dressed in the latest fashion. A man who has lost his job is no less worthy of dignity than one who signs contracts in glass towers. A family in debt is no less deserving of compassion than one with a surplus in the bank. Hardship does not diminish worth, but it does call us to responsibility. It reminds us that we are all vulnerable to life's unpredictability. The distance between stability and struggle is often far smaller than we imagine. A single accident, a single layoff, a single illness can alter everything. To recognize this truth is to recognize our shared humanity, and to see that lifting others in their time of need is not charity, but justice. It is also a reminder that opportunity must not be hoarded by the few, but extended to the many. When we give people the tools to rise above their hardship, we do not create worth in them. They already have it. We simply clear the obstacles that prevent it from being seen. Access to education, health care, fair wages, and safe communities are not privileges for the fortunate. They are the foundations that allow inherent worth to flourish. Worth shines brightest not when life is easy, but when it is tested. Think of the single parent who finds a way to laugh with their children even when bills pile high. Think of the refugee who builds a new life in a foreign land with nothing but determination. Think of the worker who, after losing everything, starts again, brick by brick, because surrender is not in their nature. These are the lives that prove hardship cannot diminish human value. It can only reveal it in new and profound ways. We often think of change as something vast, something monumental, something that requires great power or sweeping reform. But history and experience remind us of a different truth. Great transformations often begin not with grand gestures, but with the smallest of acts. A word spoken at the right moment, a hand extended to someone in need, a choice to stand up when silence would have been easier. These small acts, multiplied across countless lives, ignite the kind of change that reshapes communities and moves nations. Consider the power of a single seed planted in the ground. It is fragile, almost insignificant. But given time, it becomes a tree that offers shade, fruit, and shelter. Small acts of kindness, courage, and compassion work in the same way. What begins as a gesture, almost invisible, can grow into a legacy that touches lives far beyond what the giver could imagine. Think of the teacher who stays a few minutes after class to encourage a struggling student. To the world, it may seem like nothing more than part of the day. But to that student, it may be the spark that awakens belief, the moment that changes the trajectory of a life. Think of the neighbor who brings a warm meal to a family facing hardship. It may seem like just dinner, but to that family, it is proof they are not forgotten. Think of the stranger who speaks out when someone is being treated unfairly. It may last only a few seconds, but to the one who was silenced, it restores dignity and strength. Small acts matter because they ripple. A kind gesture inspires another. An act of courage gives permission for others to be brave. Compassion shown to one person spreads outward, often unseen, until entire communities are shaped by the echo of a single choice. Change rarely arrives as a tidal wave. More often, it builds drop by drop, choice by choice, until the tide has shifted and what once seemed impossible becomes inevitable. We must not underestimate the power of these acts simply because they do not make headlines. Headlines capture the moment of arrival, but small acts tell the story of how we got there. Civil rights movements did not begin with legislation. They began with conversations at kitchen tables, with citizens refusing to give up their seat, with individuals standing firm in the face of injustice. Scientific breakthroughs did not begin with accolades. They began with late nights in quiet labs, with one question, one experiment, one insight at a time. Every monumental shift has its roots in the unnoticed persistence of small steps. There is also a deeper truth here. Small acts do not just change others, they change us. When we take time to lift someone else, we discover the capacity of our own hearts. When we choose honesty over convenience, we strengthen our own character. When we step outside our comfort to help another, we expand the boundaries of what we thought we could do. The world is transformed not only because others are helped, but because we ourselves are reshaped in the process. And small acts are accessible to all. Not everyone has wealth to give or platforms to command, but every one of us has the ability to extend kindness, to show empathy, to act with integrity. You do not need to move mountains to change the world. You need only to move in compassion toward another human being. Even the smallest step forward carries more weight than standing still. Imagine a world where each of us committed to one small act of good each day. A door held open, a word of encouragement, a patient ear, a choice to forgive. Individually, they may seem ordinary, almost forgettable. But together, multiplied across millions, they become a movement of decency and strength that can change the very character of a society. We live in an age that prizes speed and spectacle, where significance is measured in how quickly it spreads and how loudly it is noticed. But we must not forget that the most lasting changes are often the quietest at first. They are planted in the soil of small, consistent acts nurtured over time until they grow into something vast and unshakable. There is a truth that has echoed through generations, carried by voices that demanded fairness, even when the world refused to listen. Injustice anywhere weakens us all. It may begin quietly, on the margins of society, hidden in corners where people believe no one is watching. But injustice never remains contained. It spreads, it corrodes, and it ultimately threatens the foundation of every community it touches. When we turn our eyes away from injustice because it does not touch us directly, we deceive ourselves into thinking we are safe. We tell ourselves, that is not my problem, that is not my burden, that is not my fight. But history has shown, again and again, that injustice left unchallenged does not stop at the edge of one person's life. It seeps outward, eroding trust, destabilizing communities, planting seeds of division and resentment. What begins as someone else's struggle becomes, in time, our own. Think of a society where workers are denied fair wages. At first, it may seem like the hardship of a few, but soon the effects ripple outward. Families unable to buy goods, local businesses losing customers, entire economies weakened. Or consider discrimination left unchecked. Today it may deny one child an education, one woman an opportunity, one man a voice. But tomorrow, it leaves communities fractured, wasted, and progress stalled. The harm of injustice is never isolated. It touches everything it nears. Injustice also weakens us by dulling our moral vision. When we accept unfairness for one, we begin to accept it for many. When we normalize cruelty in one circumstance, we pave the way for it to become acceptable everywhere. The moment we allow ourselves to categorize people as worthy and unworthy of justice, we begin dismantling the very principle that justice rests upon, that all are equal in dignity and worth. But just as injustice spreads, so does the response to it. The courage of one can awaken the conscience of many. A single refusal to stay silent can break through the noise of indifference. Communities grow stronger, not by ignoring injustice, but by confronting it together. Every step taken to correct a wrong strengthens the bonds that hold society together. There are countless examples in everyday life where ordinary people recognize this truth and act upon it. The student who reports bullying, knowing it would be easier to walk away. The co-worker who speaks up for someone being treated unfairly, even at personal risk. The neighbor who defends the family targeted by prejudice in their community. These are not acts of charity, they are acts of justice. They are acknowledgments that when one of us is diminished, all of us are diminished. We must understand that justice is not an abstract concept for courtrooms and legislation alone. It is lived in the choices we make toward one another every single day. It is found in how we treat those with less power than us, in whether we protect the vulnerable or exploit them, in whether we see the humanity of those who differ from us. Justice is not distant. It is immediate, woven into the fabric of our daily lives. And justice is not passive. It requires vigilance. It requires the courage to name what is wrong, even when it is unpopular. It requires the strength to demand change, even when change comes slowly. It requires humility to recognize that we are bound together and that our freedom, our prosperity, our safety are all intertwined. No one stands apart from the consequences of injustice. When we act as though injustice can be ignored, if it does not strike us personally, we weaken our own future. But when we stand together against it, when we refuse to let unfairness go unchallenged, we become stronger as a people. For justice is not merely the absence of wrong. It is the presence of right, the commitment to build a society where no one must carry the weight of oppression alone. Hope is often misunderstood. Too many think of it as a fragile thing, a wish whispered into the air, a quiet longing for circumstances to improve on their own. But real hope is not passive. Real hope is not waiting. Real hope is courage in action. It is the choice to move forward when the path is uncertain, to rise when everything around you says to stay down, to believe in tomorrow enough to work for it today. Hope takes courage because it is easier to surrender to despair. Despair requires nothing of us but acceptance. It tells us to sit still, to close our eyes, to let the weight of hardship define the limits of our future. Hope, on the other hand, demands something harder. It demands that we keep walking, even when the road is steep. It demands that we keep building, even when the tools are heavy. It demands that we believe in possibilities that others dismiss as impossible. Think of the immigrant who arrives with little more than determination, who works long hours in unfamiliar surroundings so that their children may know opportunity. That is not blind optimism. It is hope forged into action. Think of the patient battling illness who endures painful treatments, not because the struggle is easy, but because they choose to believe in healing. That is not mere wishing. It is hope made visible through perseverance. Think of the community rebuilding after disaster, hammering nails into broken homes, clearing rubble from the streets, planting seeds in soil once scorched by fire. That is not naive dreaming. It is hope embodied in resilience. Hope is courage in action because it requires us to risk disappointment. To hope is to open ourselves to the possibility of failure and yet to move forward anyway. The farmer who plants in uncertain weather, the activist who speaks out knowing the cost, the student who studies for an exam despite years of discouragement, all are expressions of hope. They are not guaranteed success, but they dare to act as if success is possible. Hope also has a power beyond the individual. It spreads. When one person stands up with courage, others see that it can be done. When one person chooses to persist, it strengthens the resolve of those who had grown wary. Hope multiplies when it is practiced. A single act of courage can lift the spirit of an entire community, reminding them that the future is not fixed, that change is possible, that progress can be won. We must be careful not to confuse hope with denial. To hope does not mean to ignore hardship or pretend that pain does not exist. True hope looks squarely at the obstacles, acknowledges the reality of struggle, and chooses to act in spite of them. It is not about closing our eyes. It is about opening them wider, seeing both the challenges and the possibilities, and deciding that the latter are worth pursuing. And hope is not only for the extraordinary moments of history. It belongs in the quiet corners of everyday life. It is present in the child who studies by candlelight, believing education can open doors. It is present in the worker who saves a few dollars each week, trusting that sacrifice today can mean stability tomorrow. It is present in the caregiver who wakes each morning to tend to a loved one, embodying devotion even when exhaustion is overwhelming. In these daily choices, hope reveals itself not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. The courage of hope also lies in its defiance. It is an act of resistance against cynicism, against fear, against the voices that insist nothing will ever change. Choose hope is to declare that despair will not have the final word, that setbacks will not be the end, that the human spirit is stronger than the hardships it faces. It is the fire that refuses to be extinguished, the light that continues to burn even in the darkest night. Too often, leadership is imagined as a solitary role, a single figure standing at the front of a room, holding the authority to decide, to command, to guide. But true leadership is not the property of one person. It is not confined to titles, offices, or positions of power. Leadership is shared. It belongs to all of us. It is exercised not only in the halls of government or the boardrooms of corporations, but in the living rooms of families, the classrooms of schools, the sidewalks of neighborhoods. Shared leadership begins with the recognition that influence is not limited to those with formal authority. Every choice we make, every example we set, every voice we raise sends a signal that shapes the culture around us. The parent teaching their child kindness is leading. The coach encouraging a team to rise after defeat is leading. The worker who stands up for fairness when no one else dares is leading. Leadership in its truest form is not about status. It is about responsibility. When we understand leadership is shared, we begin to see its presence everywhere. In communities struck by hardship, it is the neighbor who organizes food drives and gathers volunteers. In schools, it is the student who refuses to let bullying go unchallenged. In workplaces, it is the colleague who lends a hand to someone overwhelmed. These acts may not come with recognition or applause, but they embody the essence of leadership, guiding others toward a better way, showing by action what it means to care for the whole. Shared leadership is also the antidote to despair. When we place all responsibility for change onto a single figure or institution, we set ourselves up for disappointment. We wait for someone else to fix what is broken, and in waiting, we grow wary and cynical. But when we recognize that leadership is shared, we no longer wait. We act. We discover that each of us carries the power to improve the world around us, not alone, but together. History's great movements remind us of this truth. The fight for civil rights was not the work of one voice, but of countless voices. Students, ministers, workers, mothers, children, all stepping forward to lead in their own way. The labor movement was not the product of a single organizer, but of entire communities demanding dignity. Even the progress of science and discovery is not achieved by one genius alone, but by networks of people building on one another's work, sharing knowledge, sharing leadership, and pushing humanity forward. This shared model of leadership requires humility. It asks those in positions of authority to listen to the wisdom of those often unheard. It asks us to value the insights of people whose experiences differ from our own. It asks us to recognize that no one person has all the answers, but together we hold the solutions we seek. Leadership is strongest when it is distributed, when responsibility is not concentrated at the top, but spread throughout the whole. And shared leadership requires courage. To step forward and lead, even in small ways, is to risk vulnerability. It means speaking when silence would be easier, taking responsibility when others turn away, choosing action when indifference tempts us to do nothing. But courage grows when we know we are not alone. When leadership is shared, each act of bravery strengthens another. Each choice to lead creates space for more leadership to flourish. We also must understand that leadership is not about being followed. It is about lifting others so that they too can lead. A true leader does not hoard influence but multiplies it. They invite others into the work, empower them to act, and create conditions where leadership is passed from one to another like a torch lighting the way forward. In this way, leadership becomes a shared flame, not a solitary spotlight. Everyday life gives us opportunities to practice this kind of leadership. When we mentor someone, we lead. When we advocate for someone without a voice, we lead. When we take responsibility for the health of our community, our school, our workplace, we lead. Leadership is not waiting for permission. It is recognizing that each of us already has the capacity to shape the world around us. Responsibility is often spoken of in individual terms: what I must do, what you must do, what each person is accountable for in their own life. And indeed, personal responsibility matters deeply. But there is another truth we must hold alongside it: responsibility is collective. The challenges we face as a society, poverty, injustice, inequality, division, cannot be solved by individuals acting alone. They require all of us working together, bound by the recognition that my future is tied to yours and yours to mine. Collective responsibility means understanding that we do not live in isolation. Every choice we make ripples outward, shaping the lives of those around us. A business owner deciding how to treat employees shapes not only their livelihoods, but the strength of their families and neighborhoods. A policymaker deciding where to invest resources influences whether children grow up with opportunities or barriers. A neighbor deciding whether to step forward in times of crisis can determine whether a family sinks or survives. Each decision belongs to the individual who makes it, but the impact belongs to us all. This truth is seen most clearly in times of crisis. When natural disasters strike, when economies collapse, when public health is threatened, we are reminded that no one stands apart. One person's safety depends on another's caution. One family's survival depends on another's generosity. One community's recovery depends on the hands of countless strangers. In those moments, we see that responsibility cannot be divided neatly, it is shared. But this truth does not vanish once the crisis passes. Even in ordinary times, our lives are intertwined in ways we often overlook. A teacher's dedication in the classroom does not just affect one child. It strengthens the foundation of a nation's future. A nurse's care for a patient is not just about healing one body. It is about reinforcing the trust that communities place in the promise of health. A worker's commitment to their craft is not only about their paycheck. It is about the dignity of labor and the stability of society itself. Every act, however small, becomes part of the larger web of collective responsibility. Collective responsibility also means refusing to walk away from problems simply because they do not affect us personally. It is easy to say, "That is not my concern," when the injustice falls on another neighborhood, another race, another income level. But injustice anywhere has consequences everywhere. A society that tolerates inequality for some cannot sustain equality for all. A society that neglects the vulnerable eventually weakens the strong. To believe in collective responsibility is to reject the illusion that any of us can prosper while others are left behind. This principle is not a burden, it is a source of strength. When responsibility is shared, it carries the full weight alone. We lift one another, we cover for one another, we extend hands when someone stumbles, knowing that one day we may stumble ourselves. Collective responsibility transforms hardship from an individual trial into a communal challenge, one we can face with far greater resilience because we face it together. It also invites us to redefine success. True success is not measured by how far one person climbs, but by how many are able to climb alongside them. It is not about a single household flourishing while others are left in despair, but about building communities where every family can stand with dignity. When responsibility is collective, success is not a competition. It is a shared achievement. Living out this truth requires more than words. It requires action. It means creating systems that reflect our interdependence, schools that nurture all children, not just a few, healthcare that protects every life, not just the fortunate, economies that value every worker, not just the most privileged. It means choosing compassion over convenience, generosity over indifference, justice over apathy. It means recognizing that responsibility is not just about what we owe ourselves, but what we owe one another. And it calls for vigilance. Collective responsibility is not fulfilled once and for all. It must be renewed daily in the choices we make. It must be seen in how we treat strangers, in how we respond to inequality, in how we use our voices when others cannot use theirs. It must be woven into the culture of our communities until responsibility for one another is not seen as extraordinary, but as natural as breathing. The future does not arrive fully formed. It is not handed to us complete and perfect. The future is built brick by brick, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice. And the force that drives that building is perseverance. Perseverance is the willingness to keep going when the path is long, to keep working when the results are slow, to keep believing when obstacles stand in the way. It is the quiet, steady power that transforms today's struggle into tomorrow's triumph. Perseverance is not dramatic. It rarely comes with applause or headlines. It shows up in the daily choices of ordinary people who refuse to stop moving forward. It is the farmer who plants seeds season after season, even after drought has stolen harvests before. It is the student who studies late into the night after failing a test, trusting that knowledge grows with effort. It is the parent who works 2 jobs, pushing past exhaustion because their children's future demands nothing less. Verbs lives in the unsung acts that slowly, steadily shape tomorrow. History proves this again and again. Every great movement, every great discovery, every great transformation has been fueled by perseverance. The abolition of slavery, the fight for civil rights, the march toward equality, none of these victories came easily or quickly. They were the product of people who endured setbacks, who faced resistance, who knew the road would be long but walked it anyway. They understood that the future is not built by those who quit at the first sign of hardship, but by those who keep pressing on when the world tells them to stop. Perseverance builds tomorrow because it refuses to let setbacks have the final word. Failure is not the opposite of progress, it is part of the process. Every invention that reshaped humanity, light, flight, medicine, technology, was born of countless failed attempts. What made the difference was not the brilliance of one moment, but the persistence to keep trying after failure, to keep believing that the solution was possible, to keep laboring until the vision became reality. We live in an age that often glorifies speed. We want instant answers, instant results, instant success. But real change rarely happens instantly. Progress is built slowly, layer by layer, often with effort that goes unseen for years. Perseverance reminds us that patience is not weakness, it is strength. It is the discipline to keep working when applause fades, to keep believing when critics jeer, to keep building even when no one else sees the structure taking shape. Perseverance also gives meaning to struggle. Hardship is not something we seek, but when it comes, it can become the forge in which strength is made. The athlete training after defeat, the patient recovering after surgery, the worker rebuilding after losing a job, each finds in perseverance a power that hardship cannot destroy. It is through the act of pressing on that we discover our own resilience, and in discovering it, we build a tomorrow stronger than the one we left behind. But perseverance is not only personal, it is communal. Entire communities persevere together, after natural disasters, after economic collapse, after injustice. People gather, rebuild, and push forward not just for themselves but for one another. This shared perseverance is what turns tragedy into renewal. It is why cities rise again after earthquakes, why towns thrive again after factories close, why nations recover after wars. Collective perseverance becomes a testimony that no challenge, however great, can erase the human will to endure. We must remember, too, that perseverance is not simply enduring hardship, it is active. It is not waiting for tomorrow to be better, it is working to make tomorrow better. It is taking the next step, even when the road is uncertain. It is showing up again and again, not because the journey is easy, but because the destination is worthy. Perseverance is hope with muscle, faith with hands, belief with movement. Perseverance is contagious. When one person chooses not to give up, it inspires others to keep going. A child watching a parent struggle and overcome learns resilience for their own life. A community watching a neighbor rebuild after tragedy finds the courage to rebuild together. Perseverance plants seeds of strength in those who witness it, multiplying its power far beyond the individual who first chose to endure. The promise of tomorrow is never guaranteed. It is not something handed down, already complete and perfect. Tomorrow is crafted through effort, sacrifice, and the resolve to keep moving forward even when the road is steep. Perseverance is the foundation of that work. It is the force that keeps us pressing on when circumstances say to stop, the voice that whispers, again. When failure has already spoken, the hand that reaches for progress when setbacks pull us back. Perseverance is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with grand speeches or stirring headlines. Most often, it lives quietly in the lives of ordinary people who make the extraordinary choice to continue. Consider the single mother who works late into the night so her children can grow with opportunities she never had. Or the small town teacher who stays after class with the student who struggles, refusing to give up until a spark of understanding lights in the child's eyes. Or the immigrant family building a new life in unfamiliar soil, laboring through language barriers and uncertainty because they believe tomorrow will reward the sacrifices of today. These are not acts that make history books, but they are acts that build the future. History itself shows that nothing of worth has ever been achieved without perseverance. The fight for independence was not won overnight, but through years of resilience against a powerful empire. The abolition of slavery, the struggle for civil rights, the march toward equality, each required people to endure setbacks, defeats, and dangers, yet they pressed on because they believed that what lay ahead was greater than what lay behind. Even in the realm of science and discovery, perseverance has been the common thread. Edison tested thousands of materials before the light bulb illuminated a room. The Wright brothers faced repeated crashes before they carved the sky with flight. Perseverance is what transforms failure into the first step toward triumph. But perseverance is more than endurance. Endurance alone can be passive, waiting for time to heal or circumstances to change. Perseverance is active, showing up again and again, even when success is uncertain. It is planting seeds knowing the harvest may not come for years. It is working not only for personal gain, but for the hope that generations yet unborn will live in a better world because someone chose not to quit. This strength is especially important in times of hardship. When economies falter, when disasters strike, when injustices wound communities, perseverance becomes the difference between collapse and renewal. In such times, perseverance is not only individual but collective. Neighbors who rally to rebuild a flooded town. Workers who strike, not just for themselves, but for dignity across an entire industry. Communities who march peacefully in the streets, generation after generation, because the dream of equality remains unfinished. Collective perseverance transforms despair into movement and tragedy into rebuilding. There is a temptation in our modern world to seek shortcuts. We live in an age of immediacy, where answers can be found in seconds and convenience is a daily expectation. But progress is rarely instant. Change is often slow, and justice almost always comes through a long struggle. Perseverance reminds us that waiting is not weakness, And persistence is not futility. It is the discipline to stay the course, the strength to keep the vision alive when others grow tired. The belief that tomorrow is built not in a single leap, but in countless steady steps. And perseverance has another gift: it reveals to us who we truly are. It strips away illusions and comforts, leaving behind the raw truth of character. It shows whether we will bend under pressure or stand firm, whether we will surrender to difficulty or rise through it. Through perseverance, ordinary individuals discover extraordinary strength they never knew they had. They find that their capacity to endure, to work, and to believe is far greater than the challenges before them. It is also contagious. When one person perseveres, it inspires others to hold on. The sight of a neighbor rebuilding after fire, of a veteran pursuing education despite injury, of a young leader rising from failure to try again, these examples plant courage in others. Perseverance multiplies itself, spreading strength across communities, igniting movements, staining hope. Power is often imagined as something held by individuals, leaders, generals, inventors, or visionaries, but history shows us that true and lasting power is never the achievement of one person alone. True power comes from unity. When people stand together, across differences and divisions, they become stronger than any obstacle before them. Unity transforms scattered voices into a chorus that cannot be ignored, isolated efforts into movements that reshape nations, fragile hopes into unstoppable realities. Unity does not mean uniformity. It does not demand that we all think the same, look the same, or live the same lives. Unity honors diversity. It draws strength from difference. Just as a symphony requires many instruments, each with its unique sound, a society requires many perspectives to be whole. What unity asks of us is not sameness but solidarity, the willingness to link arms with others, even those unlike ourselves, for the sake of a greater purpose. The story of human progress is the story of unity's power. Freedom movements were won not by solitary heroes, but by countless unnamed individuals who joined together. Workers' rights were secured not by a single protester, but by millions insisting on dignity. Civil rights advanced not because of one march, but because of many, stretching across years, generations, and cities. Each person, acting alone, might have seemed powerless. Together, they changed the course of history. Even in the face of overwhelming challenges, unity makes the impossible possible. Consider communities rebuilding after disasters. A hurricane may flatten homes. A fire may consume neighborhoods. An earthquake may crack the very ground beneath feet. Alone, no person can restore what was lost. But together, neighbors clearing debris, volunteers delivering supplies, strangers giving shelter, ruin becomes renewal. Unity does not erase the pain, but it makes recovery achievable. Unity also protects us from forces that would divide and weaken. Division is the oldest strategy of those who seek power over others. When people are split by race, religion, class, or ideology, they can be manipulated, controlled, and silenced. But when those same people recognize their shared humanity and common future, division loses its grip. Unity breaks the chains of fear and distrust. It builds bridges where walls once stood. It allows societies to rise above the voices that profit from keeping us apart. Unity is not always easy. It requires humility, the willingness to listen to those with whom we disagree. It requires patience, the discipline to work alongside people who may frustrate us. It requires forgiveness, the courage to release past wounds so that the future is not imprisoned by old divisions. Unity demands that we see beyond ourselves and acknowledge that our destinies are bound together, whether we choose to admit it or not. But the reward of unity is unmatched. It creates movements that endure when individuals grow weary. It generates energy that multiplies with every person who joins. It builds communities where no one is left behind, because everyone has a role to play. In unity, the weak are lifted by the strong, and the strong are humbled by the needs of the weak. Together, they find a balance that no individual could achieve alone. Unity is also the foundation of democracy. The very idea of self-government is that the people, diverse, imperfect, and many, can come together to make choices for their shared future. When unity falters, democracy withers. When unity thrives, democracy flourishes. It is not consensus on every issue that matters, but the commitment to remain bound together in the work of building a common tomorrow. Unity can be seen in the quiet places as well as in great movements. It is the neighborhood where families of different backgrounds gather for a shared meal. It is the classroom where students from every walk of life learn side by side. It is the workplace where colleagues put aside personal ambition to complete something greater than themselves. These daily acts of unity may not make headlines, but they are the hidden scaffolding on which strong societies are built. The power of unity lies not only in what it achieves, but in what it affirms: that none of us are truly alone, that our struggles are shared, that our victories belong to all. There is a truth that echoes across generations, across cultures, across faiths and philosophies. The measure of a society is found in how it treats those most vulnerable. Strength is not revealed in how high the powerful climb, but in how faithfully they reach back to lift others who are struggling. The paradox of human progress is that when we bend down to raise another, we ourselves rise higher. Everyday life offers quiet testimonies to this truth. A neighbor who takes in the children of a single parent working a night shift makes possible not only that parent's livelihood, but the flourishing of a family. A stranger who buys a warm meal for someone hungry gives more than food. They restore dignity, a sense of belonging, the reminder that someone cares. A teacher who believes in a student no one else sees potential and changes the trajectory of an entire future. These acts may appear small, but they multiply in ways unseen, carrying ripples outward into generations. History, too, shows us that lifting others has always been the wellspring of advancement. The great social movements, abolition, suffrage, civil rights, were not driven by people fighting only for themselves, but by those willing to risk comfort, reputation, even their lives, to lift others into equality and justice. Scientists and inventors whose work has cured diseases, connected continents, and fed billions did not labor for personal glory alone. They envisioned a better world for people they would never meet. In lifting humanity, they elevated themselves as well, leaving legacies greater than wealth or fame. Lifting others requires vision beyond self-interest. It asks us to look past our own struggles and recognize the humanity of those beside us. This is not easy in a world where competition is often glorified, where success is too often defined as climbing above others rather than climbing with them. Yet true progress does not come from stepping on the backs of others. It comes from extending hands. When businesses create opportunities for workers, when communities protect the vulnerable, when leaders advocate for the voiceless, build systems where more people can stand tall. That rising tide lifts not only individuals but entire nations. There is also a spiritual strength in lifting others. Generosity, compassion, service, these qualities enlarge the human spirit. The person who gives of themselves does not lose, but gains. The one who mentors a younger colleague does not diminish their own career, but enriches it. The community that opens its doors to refugees does not weaken, but discovers new resilience in diversity. When we lift others, we participate in something larger than ourselves. We touch the enduring truth that human destiny is shared. Consider the times of deepest crisis. In wars, in natural disasters, in pandemics, it is never selfishness that carries people through. It is solidarity, sacrifice, and the willingness to lift each other. Neighbors who share food when supplies run low. Health workers who risk their lives to heal. Volunteers who cross danger to deliver aid. Their acts remind us that survival is not enough. It is lifting one another that transforms survival into renewal. Lifting others also plants seeds of hope. A person once denied opportunity but later given a chance often becomes the one most committed to helping others succeed. The child lifted from poverty through the kindness of strangers grows into the adult who builds programs for the poor. Hope, once planted in one heart, does not stay there. It spreads, it multiplies, it inspires. And through this cycle, societies rise higher generation after generation. We must also remember that lifting others is not only about grand gestures, it is lived in daily choices. Choosing to listen to someone who feels invisible. Choosing patience with someone who is learning. Choosing to speak up when injustice is ignored. Choosing to invest time, energy, or resources into someone else's future. These choices shape the moral fabric of our communities, stitch by stitch, until what emerges is a society woven together by compassion and mutual strength. When we lift others, we affirm the truth that our destinies are connected. No one truly rises alone. Every achievement we claim rests on the support of others, teachers, families, mentors, communities. And every step forward we take becomes a platform for someone else to stand upon. In this way, lifting others is not charity, but justice. It is not weakness, but strength. It is not loss, but gain. My friends, the story we have walked together is not about a homeless man denied entry to a bank, nor a single act of injustice, nor even one moment of compassion that followed. It is about us, about who we are, about what we choose to become, and about the kind of tomorrow we are willing to build. We have seen how dignity belongs to everyone. We have remembered that ordinary people, in their quiet acts of courage, shape the future. We have felt the strength of community, the unshakable truth that hardship does not diminish worth, and the power of small acts to ignite big change. We have been reminded that injustice anywhere weakens us all, that hope is courage in action, and that leadership is not confined to titles but lives in the choices of everyday citizens. We have carried forward the conviction that responsibility is collective, that perseverance builds tomorrow, and that unity multiplies power. And we have embraced the eternal truth that in lifting others we rise. This is the calling before us, to look at the world not as it is but as it could be, to resist despair and division, to believe, against all odds, that the broken can be rebuilt, that the forgotten can be remembered, that the overlooked can be lifted, and that together we can write a story worthy of the generations yet to come. The future is waiting, not to be inherited, but to be created. And it will be created by hands that choose compassion, by voices that speak for justice, by hearts that refuse to give up, and by communities that stand as one.